Jared, Ted Turner opened up his checkbook to Eric Bischoff, and he said, I'll give you 2 hours to compete with Vince McMahon in prime time. And boy, did he ever. Monday Nitro was born in 1995 on September the 4th. You're looking at it on your screen on the YouTube channel. Sting and Ric Flair on live TV for the first Monday Nitro, and Lex Luger showing up unexpectedly, not telling anybody. Man, what a wild time it was. Man, what do you remember, first of all, about this first Nitro and watching it, and just how it changed your perspective in 1995?
Man, I was just so captivated by like it being in a mall, the Mall of America.
I know. And it never went back.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it would have, but it was just crazy because I remember tuning in and I'm like, what kind of place are they at? And, you know, so immediately, you know, it has your attention and you keep watching and like you can see people just walking by, you know, they're shopping. What in the world's going on over there? You know, there's Hulk Hogan, and off they go. So, I mean, I thought it was a cool setup. It's kind of like the ballroom where ACW goes. What's it called?
Oh, shoot. I know what you're talking about. Hammerstein.
Yeah, Hammerstein Ballroom.
Yep.
It's one of those places that just looks so awesome that I wish, and it's a smaller venue, I guess, and probably they had trouble charging for tickets if they even did for that first Nitro, so that's probably why they didn't go back. But it was just such a cool thing that stands out, just like all the matches I remember seeing and events that happened at the Hammerstein, those stick out in my mind. The same way this Mall of America sticks out in my mind since it was home base for the first Nitro.
Yeah, for sure. And then you had all the Nitros that happened at Disney MGM, and then the Spring Break Nitros.
Spring Break.
Yeah, and then you had the WWF Monday Night Raws that originated in the Manhattan Center. So they did that for a year. So like the first...
Do you remember whenever we would get the little WCW rings and put them on the float in the pool and act like we were having the wrestling event there at Spring Break where you had the water around the ring?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Just those unique venues just stand out, especially in the young, moldable minds that we had, just soaking in everything wrestling. Man, that kind of stuff appeals for sure. So I love this original Monday Nitro. They only had 3 matches. I'll correct myself. I think it was only an hour, maybe not 2 to start with. But they only had 3 matches. It was Jushin Thunder Liger against Flying Brian. It was Sting against Ric Flair, and it was Hulk Hogan against Big Bubba. It was just
Big Bubber.
Big Bubber. It was a wild time. But this would obviously springboard the Monday Night Wars. Now we're seeing action figure lines, the Monday Night War action figures that are coming out. You have the Lex Luger figure that depicts that first appearance, and then, you know, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more of those things coming down the line. But take me through as we got older. So 1995, I was about to turn 7. So I think I was 6 when this Nitro aired. So I'm about to turn 7, and I'm just loving wrestling. It's great to have wrestling on live TV. Now we have to decide if we're going to record Raw and watch Nitro, or we're going to watch Nitro and record Raw. You know, you have all of that debacle. You got to watch the next one the next day after school because you can't stay up, blah, blah, blah. But then the Monday Night Wars happened, and then the infamous 83 weeks where WCW wins, the NWO was running hot, then DX and Austin. What are some of your favorite memories? They don't have to be specific moments that happened on a show, but your memories of the Monday Night Wars and growing up in that era.
Man, it was crazy. I remember at one point I actually had, I would tape on one television with a VCR. I would tape like WCW, and I might be watching that one. But in another room, I would have the VCR recording Monday Night Raw. And so,
dude, let me stop you right there. I remember coming over to your house. For those of you who don't know, I called Jared, my brother from another mother, because we literally grew up 0.2 of a mile apart on the same road. His mom and my stepdad are siblings, so we were together all the time watching wrestling. I remember coming to your house, and us, like, you would go to one room and I would go to the other, and we would literally shout back and forth as to what was happening, and then we'd switch and do all the things. All right, go ahead.
It's crazy, man, because I mean, think of how awesome it would be in today's time where you have like the picture in picture.
Yep.
So we could actually just sit and watch both of them.
Yep.
But instead, we're running from room to room. I'm sure it probably drove my parents nuts. But I mean, they were good sports. They let the craziness happen. I don't know, man. I remember, of course, the first thing that pops in my head, and I remember Eric Bischoff giving the results of WWF Raw away, and me watching them being like, did he really just tell me what was going to happen before it happened?
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that. But of course, you had the night whenever they told everybody Mick Foley's going to be winning that world title, and that was when the 83 weeks ceased to be, and it did not become 84. So,
right.
That just sticks out in my head, dude. It was just, you had all these big stars and big angles, and everything just seemed big. I mean, everything meant something. You would go to school the next day. You had your WCW people. You had your WWF people. You had your people like me and you that watched both.
Yeah.
And everybody would be talking and, oh, did you see this? No, I was watching this. Did you see that? No, I was watching that. It was insane, dude. I loved it.
You know, Lex Luger jumped ship on the first Monday Nitro, and then you had a couple other guys. Of course, you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming in a little while later, and you had some big stars that switched brands. But what fascinated me about the Monday Night Wars is the mid-card guys that switched brands. Because, like, I'll never forget turning on Monday Nitro, and all of a sudden the British Bulldog just randomly walks out. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. What is he doing there? And then, like, they would show up, they'd wrestle a couple matches, boom, never to be heard from again. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, what are we doing here? So, like, X-Pac bounced back and forth between shows. And Mr. Perfect showing up on WCW. I'm like, wait a minute. What is this guy doing? So, to me, it wasn't like the big stars. It was the mid-card guys that I was so used to seeing on the other channel that just made me scratch my head. You know what I mean? I could get behind the big stars and be like, oh, this is cool to get to see them here. But the mid-card guys, I'm like, what are we doing?
It's crazy, man, thinking back, because I'll ask you this question, and everybody out there can kind of answer it in their own minds. Why was it that you could have a wrestler, like, we'll just use X-Pac as an example, and it doesn't even fit him necessarily, but you have them on WWF, and you're like, oh, man, that guy's awesome. And, you know, their outfit's different, and they're portrayed this way. And then you would see him on Nitro, and you'd be like, this guy looks like second rate. Like, he's not a big deal. And then they go back to WWF, and they're back to being a big deal again. It had to just be the presentation, the booking, because the crowd at that time, there really wasn't a WCW and a WWF crowd. They intertwined at some point.
Yep.
And so it really makes no sense. You would think that wrestler A that moves over to this side should be just as big as they were when they came from this side. But that wasn't always the case. It's crazy to think back on.
Yeah, man, the creative and the presentation, I think you hit the nail on the head, because if you listen, creative was a cluster backstage at WCW, because you had Kevin Sullivan, God rest his soul, rest in peace. You had Kevin Sullivan writing these stories for these guys. And then Eric Bischoff was supposedly in charge, and then he would say, oh, no, I don't like that. And then he would change it. And then Kevin Nash would walk up and be like, nope, I don't like that. I'm not doing that. I'm changing it. And then Scott Hall would walk up and he would say, oh, I'm booked for that house show. Nope, I'm not showing up. And there were no repercussions for anything. I'll tell you the one guy that popped in my head when you were going through that with X-Pac, and he wasn't a huge star for either company, but I think the presentation part of it and the creative part lines up with this guy perfect, and that's Jeff Jarrett. Jeff Jarrett, in 1995, he had a huge angle with the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels and the Road Dogg and the lip syncing thing and the With My Baby Tonight, and he was portrayed as a top mid-level guy. He had never made it to the main event picture, but he was top mid-level guy. Well, he comes into WCW, and supposedly he's going to be the fourth horseman, and Ric Flair is going to anoint him, and that just didn't really go as everybody thought it would, and the fans weren't very accepting of it, and it was, he was like, well, you're sort of Ric Flair light, and that's the way that booking thought of him, and he never got to that level. Well, then fast forward the next year, he goes back to WWF and he cuts his hair. He's got Deborah. He brings Deborah with him. He's smashing dudes and chicks over the head with a guitar, and he's having a good housekeeping match with China. And the thing is through the roof. Well, then Jared, 99, he goes back to WCW, and they immediately put the world title on him. And then Vince Russo shows up, and it all goes downhill. So I think Jeff Jarrett's a great example of it's literally the same guy. He literally has the same wrestling skills, but the character and the presentation and creative just sent him all over the place.
Yep. I mean, that's exactly what happened with him. I mean, chaos on one side, and then you had the other side, which was almost maybe too far when it goes to being strict.
Sure.
Up until you had like DX and Stone Cold, they just opened up the floodgates for that. But WWF, I mean, they would punish people if you didn't show up at your bookings and so on and so forth. They made you behave for the most part. They at least tried to.
Yep.
So just all that combined, I guess, that kind of answers my question.
It was a wild time, man. The Monday Night Wars were just an absolutely incredible time. The only thing I regret about the Monday Night Wars is I wish I was a little bit older in watching them. Not that I would have been like smartened up or anything, but I wish I wouldn't have looked at it through 8-year-old glasses. You know what I mean? I wish I would have had like 10 or 11-year-old glasses to really appreciate more of what was happening and to really because there's a lot of things that I look back on, I'm like, oh, that was so awesome. And in reality, it was not awesome, you know?
Well, I mean, I was about, how old are you right now?
I'm 35.
35. So I'm almost 5 years older than you. So I actually did have the older glasses on at the time. And I mean, I still didn't appreciate it. Like, I didn't know everything that was going on behind the scenes. There was just so much that I just did not know. I didn't understand.
Yep.
So, but we had the honor and the privilege of looking at it through kid glasses, and it just seeming bigger than life.
Yep.
So,
and you could argue that's why we're fans today, and that's why we have a podcast today, because of the way that we looked at that era.